Today we have a program on climate change, and I'm going to introduce Robin. Robin is our webmaster and on the board of directors, and she has a PhD in physical oceanography, and she is a member of the faculty at NPS and is also very active with the League of Women Voters U.S. Climate Change Committee. So we're very pleased to have Robin give us background information addressing climate science and what's happening in terms of climate locally, and she in turn will introduce our next speaker. Robin.
So I should have brought a stool, I guess. So I want to start our discussion on climate change and discuss what's happening and what we see locally in the conditions related to climate change. And I'm going to begin by assuming that most of us in this room, if not all, accept the fact that as we're introducing a lot of carbon and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the global temperature of the Earth is warming. And this past year, we saw the Earth was the highest it's ever been in temperature over the history of the records. So this first diagram is just showing what you see in a lot of media is the increase in carbon to our atmosphere that's measured in Hawaii. And it's measured at Mauna Loa. And then also on this figure is plotted the increase in carbon that's measured at Point Arena, which is in Mendocino County. And that's the red line in the lower right-hand corner. And so you can see that locally we're introducing the carbon at the same rate as we see globally in the measurements. In fact, at Point Arena, it's a little bit higher. So what we think about first when we introduce this carbon into the atmosphere and it's warming, we look at the temperature rise. So globally, we see an increase in temperature and it's increasing rapidly, but also on the more local scale. So this is showing just the rise in the temperature over California. And if you just look at the right-hand side of that graph, that's from about 1960 to 2002, you can just see the rate in California as it's increasing. And most of this is occurring over in the Central Valley area and east of the coast. So when we look at it just locally, I looked at some long-term measurements in Monterey, and the middle line is the average temperature from about 1950 to 2014. And you can see that it's a pretty straight line, that trend line in the middle for the average. But what's occurring in Monterey is that we have our nighttime temperatures on the bottom is actually increasing, and our daytime temperatures, that's the top line, they're decreasing. So in the average, we have just a sort of neutral state. So things don't always change the same way wherever we go. Also, when we're in California, we also think about sea level rise because we're on the coast. And this map is showing how sea level trends across the globe are changing, and it's based on satellite data that can measure quite accurately down to millimeters the change in the sea level, and we can look at how the trends in sea level rise are occurring over the whole globe. So while we get a global number of sea level rise over 20 years, it's about 2.5 inches, we see that it's not spread evenly over the globe. We have an extreme increase in the Western Pacific, in the tropical region, where those people on those islands around that area are really concerned and worried about sea level rise because it is so extreme. But when we're looking off of the coast of California, we have minimal sea level rise in this area. If we just extract the values along the timeline from that area, we can see that we have a really variable sea level, but the trend over these 20 years is about zero, very close to zero. But we can see the large peak there towards the left side of that plot is related to the 1997-98 El Nino. So while the sea level rise is not of immediate concern here, we need to think about what's going to happen in the future also, and what is of concern to these other parts of the globe. This is the precipitation trend, and it's slightly positive, but not very much. And I was a bit surprised by this. There's a lot of variability in it. But towards the right side of the plot, you can see how negative that precipitation value is, and that's 2012 and 13 shown there. So we're way below even the long-term average since 1960 in Monterey, even though the average trend is slightly positive. So the other thing with introducing a lot of carbon into the atmosphere is it gets soaked up by the ocean, and Monterey Bay Aquarium, the research institute, has been measuring how much carbon is going into the ocean, and also measuring the pH of the ocean in the Monterey Bay. So the green line there is showing how much the carbon is increasing in the Monterey Bay, and in the lower plot it's showing the pH level in the bay. The pH is actually increasing the acidity of the ocean, which affects various organisms in the ocean, especially those with external skeletons. So what about the future projections, and how is this done? All these projections, and we talk about projections in the climate world rather than predictions, because it's not such a precise measurement. And we make this by running models that are similar to weather models, but for a much longer time these are run and at a much lower resolution. And various countries and institutes in the United States run these models. So NOAA has a model, the Research Institute in Colorado has a model, there's a model from the weather people in Europe, and another one from Germany, and another one from Japan. And we run always run these models, and then we get an average. So the little plot over there on the right, the time is along the bottom, and then the temperature is along the y-axis. And it's showing the increase in what we think the local temperature, and this is at Pebble Beach. And so we can see that the red line is showing an increase of about, I think it's about 2 degrees for Pebble Beach in the next 100 years. But the shaded area also shows the uncertainty in that measurement. So although it's a 2.5 degree trend in the mean, there's an uncertainty of about the same amount. So it actually could not change at all and still fall well within the projections. So that's for temperature. And then we have one also for sea level. And this is from the National Research Council report that they did for sea level along the West Coast in 2012, and it's probably the most accurate information that we have. So it takes in how the ocean is changing by absorbing more energy, by currents changing position, and also by what's happening on land, whether land is going up or down, and how much they think glacial melting is contributing to the sea level rise. And in their estimate, they've come up with an estimate for north of Mendocino and an estimate south of Mendocino. And the one north is a little bit lower than the one south. So this is just summarizing what is on that other page. And what I want to emphasize is how the uncertainty is changing as we go further out, and how that might affect how we plan for adapting to sea level rise. So if we just look at the California, this is the area that's south of Mendocino. By 2030, there's only a rise of 5 inches, they're estimating, but it has a plus or minus of several inches also, so we have to consider that. And then by 2050, it's 10 inches, and then that's also plus and minus a larger uncertainty in that box that's around the central dot. And then 2100, we get a much larger value of 36 inches. But again, the uncertainty in that value is, again, very broad. And as you project further and further downstream, you're getting more and more uncertain. And so what is of interest is, how do you plan for that? Do you take the 2100 value of uncertainty to, for example, if you're planning on protecting your coastline with seawalls, and knowing that in 10 years or 20 years you're going to replan for something in your planning documents? Or do you plan for a 2030 value that is a much lower value, but it also has a much smaller uncertainty? And I went to the Pacific Grove Planning Commission meeting, and they're updating their local land use plan for the coast, and they're using a value of 55 inches. So they're way out there in the future, and I think it's an extreme value. So the one thing that hasn't been considered in these plots is storm surge. And what storm surge is the amount of wave action that's hitting the coast during a storm. So you're going to get more storm surge if you have stronger winds offshore and they are blowing for a longer period of time. And so our climate models don't, although it's in the computation when they're running the models, we don't have the ability right now to get that information from the climate models to actually make a projection of what the storm surge might be. And the storm surge is the actual quantity that you really should be concerned with, rather than just sea level rise itself. So the last thing I wanted to mention before handing it over to Heather is what we're doing with the League for Climate Change. So at the national level, everyone knows that getting much done with climate in Congress is zero. The probability of anything happening is probably 0, or maybe 1%. So what the League has been doing is to looking for other opportunities to take action. So the League is not supporting the Keystone Pipeline, and it's actively encouraging its membership to contact Obama to encourage him to veto the legislation if it gets through Congress. And the second item that we're doing is to support the EPA's new regulations on clean power. And the Clean Power Plan, I think the review period and the comment period is closed now. But the National League did take action in encouraging its members to write to the EPA to support that energy plan that the EPA has put forward. So with that, I'm going to introduce Heather now. She's here. She's going to speak to you about how state regulations and policies related to climate change are being implemented locally. So we have all this science, and we sort of know what's going on, but how do you, and then we have legislation that's passed, so how do you actually implement it once it's done there and get positive things to occur locally about climate change? So Heather is a principal planner at AMBAG, the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments. She has a bachelor's degree in planning from UC San Diego and a master's in public administration from San Diego State. And she is also a certified planner with the American Institute of Planning. So, Heather?
Well, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate getting out in the field. I actually haven't been out to Carmel in the last couple months, so I was a little nervous about driving down today since the tournament was going on, but it wasn't too bad. So today I wanted to give you a little bit of background about what AMBAG is, some highlights of our new Sustainable Communities program at AMBAG, what we're doing to implement it over the next couple years, talk about the AMBAG Energy Watch program, which you have a handout there, and then if you have any questions, can definitely try and answer those. So AMBAG was established back in 1968. We are the metropolitan planning organization for the 3 counties of Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Benito. We provide a wide range of services, mostly technical services and planning services. We don't have land use authority. We don't build transportation projects, so most of our efforts are focused on regional collaboration, implementing the state and federal guidelines related to transportation and sustainability, as well as economic development and other studies that we do. I mentioned the 3 counties. We have, in terms of voting members, 1 representative from each of the 18 jurisdictions and 2 supervisors from each of the county. We also have some ex officio members from our regional partners in transportation. So it would be the Transportation Agency for Monterey County here in Monterey, as well as Caltrans and the Air District. We also will be taking an item tonight to our board meeting to add additional representation in terms of an ex officio member from the transit operators of Monterey Salinas Transit. So sort of the benefits of AMBAGs, we leverage the needs of the jurisdictions to obtain effective grant funding and projects. The main one that we've been working on over the past few years is our Sustainable Community Strategy. It is the new state mandate that came out of Assembly Bill 32 and then more directly Senate Bill 375, SB 375. We do regional land use and transportation planning, air quality conformity. We're currently in attainment for that, but we've been put on notice that some of the thresholds may change and we may be in non-attainment for one of the pollutants. So we are, even though we don't do air quality conformity right now, we may need to do it in the future. We maintain our regional travel demand model. So this is where we input all the jurisdictions' informations on their local roads, all the transit routes and all the highways and freeways that we have here, and use to predict transportation issues and traffic out to the year 2035. We also are a data warehouse. We maintain a lot of data, mostly related to population, housing, employment, job information, as well as imagery related to the land use and typologies, and we provide that information free of charge to our member agencies. I'll talk a little bit more on our energy efficiency programs and our climate action planning work later in the presentation, but we also have been doing work with MBVA and Ecology Action on electric vehicle charging stations, helping them decide and implement where those stations could be installed, simply as more and more people are moving towards electric vehicles. So just a summary of the different type of programs we have. We cover almost everything with the exception of water, and that's not really one I want to put up on that screen in this area, so we'll just skip that. Senate Bill 375, this was approved back in 2008. It is a direct output of AB 32, which was approved a couple years earlier. But this Senate Bill 375 really implemented the land use and transportation component of AB 32, and I'll talk a little bit more about AB 32, but basically it was the statewide bill that said we need to reduce energy or greenhouse gas emissions back to 1990 levels, a percentage reduction by 2020 and a 90% reduction by 2050. That covers all sectors of greenhouse gas reduction, so not just land use and transportation, how much we drive and where we build things in our jurisdiction, but also energy efficiency programs, switching to electric vehicles, making cars smarter and less pollutant. And so the one that AMBAG has responsibility for really is the land use and transportation connection, how the jurisdictions are building, how are they growing, and how does that affect how much we travel, and how can we reduce greenhouse gases from that out into the future. And so the state, out of SB 375, required that each of the regions, there's 18 MPOs throughout California. We're the one for the 3 counties here. We had to prepare a new element called the Sustainable Community Strategy. And as part of that, the California Air Resources Board set targets for each of the regions. This was the first time around, first time anyone had done this in the state. I actually worked on the plan that was done in San Diego before I came here, and that was actually the first one done in the state back in 2011. Ours was adopted last year. Our greenhouse gas reduction goals, targets that were set by the state, given to us, were a 0% maintain our greenhouse gas emissions for 2020 and a 5% reduction for 2035. Keep in mind this is just for land use and transportation. So basically how much you drive, how much you travel, how can we reduce the vehicle miles traveled by building more walkable communities, providing more active transportation, providing more public transit, bus or rail programs, rather than just have everyone drive everywhere all the time. And so that was our goal, was to focus on that. All the other AB 32 strategies fall under some other agency, either it be a local jurisdiction or a state agency in terms of reducing greenhouse gases. So we were just given targets for this. We also received a couple grants to help us do this initial scenario planning. The region hadn't really done this effort at such a large scale, and so I'll describe that process. We basically started out with a vision in terms of goals and coming up with performance policy objectives on how to meet the goals, and then ultimately performance measures to measure how well we are doing that. And you can see environments on the bottom right. Obviously, that's where our greenhouse gas reduction objective would come in, but we wanted to make sure that we were also maintaining our region's economic vitality, providing access and mobility, and then system preservation and safety. A lot of what we spend money on in this area and transportation really is maintaining our roads, maintaining our existing highways, as well as the operations of those transit programs. And so we actually don't have a lot of money that we are spending on new capacity, but so when we started the development of a plan, people thought it was really important to make sure we maintain and rehab and protect our system that we already have in place. So what is a sustainable community strategy? Basically, you have two major components. It's the land use pattern. How is each jurisdiction in the 3 counties going to grow? How many people? How many new jobs? How many new homes? And where are they going to be over to the year 2035? And so we worked very closely with all 21 local jurisdictions on developing a growth forecast that took into account the last time we had done this, we had had a pretty big recession. And so we really need to take a reality check on what was going to be done over the next few years and as we moved out to the year 2035. And so we worked fairly closely with all the jurisdictions on what was going on in their community, what did they have planned, what did they entitle, what were they developing, or what was potentially, if they weren't in that stage yet, what did they expect over the next few years. And then the other half of a sustainable community strategy really is the transportation network. What kind of projects, what kind of programs, services, and strategies. So we, this time around, there's a large focus on transit between rail, light rail, as well as bus services, roadway improvements, and active transportation. The funding in this program compared to the last is increased dramatically, just in the number of bicycle and pedestrian projects, safe routes to school programs, as well as van pool programs. We have an agriculture van pool program that AMBAG operates, as well as making our existing system operate more efficiently. Just to give you an idea of where we are, you can see the AMBAG region I put up on the top. That's the population for 2010 was our baseline. We've verified that against the census, and then where we expect to grow by the end of the horizon year 2035. You can see at the bottom the difference, the change between population, jobs, and housing in Monterey County. So scenario planning. Basically what we did is we had a number of working groups. We had our planning directors, which included a representative from all the jurisdictions. We worked with our public works staff in all the jurisdictions, as well as the transit operators, and we also had a regional advisory committee, and that was made up of key stakeholders. Actually, your president, Janet Brennan, served on that, so she actually could probably give this presentation up here because she's seen it so many times. But basically what we did is we started off with different puzzle pieces, different scenarios, and different combinations of land uses. What happens if we put more apartments and townhomes here or smaller homes, and what happens if we line that up with a new bus route? What would that do? And we approached that kind of approach region-wide, where we put those type of improvements where it made sense throughout the region. And we found out sort of through our modeling efforts and performance results what kind of made sense. And so what we ended up with was a hybrid, because no one size fit all across the 3 counties, but it was a good exercise to find out what really is the most effective use of land use versus the combination of transportation projects to serve it. And so what we came up with was basically a transportation plan with just under $8 billion worth of investments for the 3 counties. And it included local street and roads, just about $1.6 billion worth of investments, 60 miles of trails along the coast, spending almost $1 billion on active transportation, so that's bicycle and pedestrian, and then over $2.5 billion on transit improvements. And so this slide here just sort of highlights some of the key projects throughout the 3 counties. But I also wanted to show you the breakdown financially is how the expenditures broke down. So you can see the majority of our expenditures are on the transit side, and then the breakdown between active transportation and local street and roads. I should point out that the local street and road portion, it's not so much building new local street and roads. That portion right there really is maintaining and rehabbing our existing local street and roads. And then you can see most of the revenues are either local or state, with a very small portion coming from the federal side. On the Monterey County, I just wanted to highlight, we did pull some of this off the other slides, but these are some of the highlights in terms of projects in Monterey County. A multimodal corridor from Salinas to Marina area, Monterey branch line, extending the Capitol Corridor rail from San Jose and Gilroy down to Salinas, and then a number of active transportation and local street and road improvements. So overall, the Sustainable Community Strategy really is the region's plan for integrating the land use and transportation network. And it transitions some of our commercial corridors that we have here today in the county to more of a mixed-use transit corridor. So typically, you'd have more just businesses and retail, but homes wouldn't be nearby. This sort of working with the jurisdictions, we really wanted to put some more mixed-use development, so mixture of retail, commercial, and housing in certain areas within the county that is appropriate. It does exceed the CARB, the Air Resources Board, greenhouse gas reduction targets for 2020 and 2035. The Air Resources Board gave everyone a first round target. These were ours. They're reevaluating everyone's targets for the next round. So that's something we'll be working on reevaluating. This was a new process for everybody, so they kind of, didn't know where to start. And so our targets, I expect, will change for our next round 2 SCS. The Sustainable Community Strategy, or SCS for short, also includes implementation strategies, and that's sort of what I wanted to talk about in a second. This is how we can implement, working with the jurisdictions, working with the transit or transportation providers on getting us to those greenhouse gas reductions. This just highlights our target for the 2035 plan. We will be extending the plan out to 2040. We've been told from the Air Resources Board that we will be getting new targets. I do not know if that will be a new target for 2020 and 2035, but that discussion will occur later this year, and our next plan is due 2018. Some of the performance metrics, these all tie back to those goals, that circular chart that I showed you in the beginning. We wanted to make sure that what we were including, we weren't just focusing so much on greenhouse gas reductions and climate change at the expense of other important metrics. And so we have 13% of open space being preserved, greenhouse gases over a 2005 baseline, a 6%, nearly 6% reduction. The one I find really promising, and I want to work to getting it increased, is 57% of the jobs in the region will be located within a half mile of a transit stop. And to me, that really gives people the option a realistic option of using transit for their commute, and a really good way to help us really reduce greenhouse gases. Another thing I just want to point out on the top right, basically 50% of the funding in this plan isn't for new projects. It's to maintain and operate our current existing systems. So we are not building a lot of new roads, not a lot of new facilities. It really is a lot going towards maintenance. Public outreach, this was over a 2-year effort. I mentioned our regional advisory committee. We had many, many workshops and meetings, created a video and a website, as well as many survey opportunities. So now I want to talk about some of the other energy programs that AMBAG works on. You have a handout at your sheet. It's a 2-page summarizing the program, the AMBAG Energy Watch Partnership. This is a partnership with PG&E. And this really gets at some of the other AB 32 climate change programs. This is administered by AMBAG Energy Watch staff. We have an Energy Watch program headed up by Elizabeth Russell. I don't know, I'm sure some of you have met with her before. It does anything from energy assessments and audits for special districts, local jurisdictions, to directly installing energy efficient equipment, technical assistance to our local jurisdictions, particularly on how to retrofit municipal buildings. We are providing training courses and seminars in the region. We also work with them on climate change planning efforts with the local jurisdictions. And so we develop energy action strategies for each of our local jurisdictions, and we also completed greenhouse gas inventories for all 21 jurisdictions. And that's what we did to establish a baseline, so as they move forward, we can track and monitor how each of the jurisdictions are moving forward and as they develop their own individual climate action plans. So a lot of the things that we're working on now relate to implementation of the Sustainable Community Strategy. We're working with MST and Santa Cruz Metro, as well as San Benito, on our rural transit needs. Typically, transit works best where there's more people and going from one way to another. But we found there really is a need in some of our more rural areas that if there was an option for transit to either get to the sort of more traditional job centers or educational facilities or medical facilities, we received a grant from Caltrans to look at the rural transit needs and identify solutions. They might not be the big bus on regular fixed route service, but what can we do to get people out of their individual driving alone to make a trip? And so we'll be working on that. We also received another grant from the Strategic Growth Council to help us implement this Sustainable Community Strategy. One has to do with economic development. Typically, the downtown areas or communities that are more appropriate to mixed use are things like downtown San Jose or San Francisco or Berkeley or something like that. We want to see how we can appropriately design a mixed use area for downtown Salinas or work with Monterey or some of the other areas like Watsonville. And so we're going to be looking at how can we make sure that it is an economic driver in terms of bringing commercial and jobs to the area, but also helping us reduce GHG. And so we're going to be working, we have 3 pilot cities that we're going to be working with, King City, Salinas, and Watsonville, to help us sort of develop guidelines that they can implement in their jurisdiction. And then we're going to want to come up with a template that we can offer to all the other jurisdictions in our 3 counties that they could use as they're updating their general plan to really help us focus on implementing things at the local level that would help us reduce GHG. We are already beginning our update for the next transportation plan and sustainable community strategy that will go out to the year 2040. We will be getting new greenhouse gas reduction targets from the state, so that's something that we'll have to work for. And then we'll be working again very closely with all the local jurisdictions, the public, and our partner agencies as well. And then I do want to tell you that the AMBAG Energy Watch programs is something that's ongoing. It's something that Elizabeth's team really works on, is out in the field, out in the public. I don't know how many schools they've visited recently to do school audits, energy audits, to figure out what they can do to reduce their energy use. So that's definitely an ongoing program. So with that, that kind of sums up what we're doing, at least the local and regional level, and I'd be happy to answer any questions with Robin.
Is AMBAG a state agency or is it just a non-profit organization? That's question number one. The second question is, how is your guidelines interact with the county general plan? Or, for that matter, for the for reuse is having the architectural design right now. How do you interact with them? Thank you.
The first question, AMBAG is not a state agency. We are a state-created agency, which called a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO for short. It is a federally designated and state-designated agency. Most of our funding at AMBAG is through either grants or we receive federal transportation planning dollars to conduct our required work. And then a lot of that funding we flow through to transportation agencies like TAMC or the Santa Cruz Regional Transportation Commission. The second question is, how do we work with the county's general plan and FORA's design work? In terms of when we meet and discuss how each of the jurisdiction is going to grow, including the county, we sat down with county planners. We looked at their general plan. AMBAG does not have land use authority, so we had to sit down with every jurisdiction and ask them, where do you see your jurisdiction growing? How do you see it growing? Where do you see more people, homes, jobs growing? They give that information to us. Sometimes it is as detailed as marking up maps. We then input that information in our models along with the transportation investments, and so we can evaluate that. At every process, each of the jurisdiction is making sure, yes, this is consistent with either the plan that's the county plan or general plan that's adopted, or if they have an update underway, how that's moving forward. On the FORA side, we work with all the jurisdictions making up the FORA area. We also, as part of our Planning Directors Forum, we do include FORA staff. We did participate in one of those design meetings last week. And so it's similar. They don't really have, an adopted general plan per se, but we do work with them very closely during that same process to say, what is going on over the next 5 years? What is going on? And keep in mind, I mentioned we are updating this plan. It's due by 2018, so this plan gets updated every 4 years. So the most important part of this plan really is the next 4 to 5 years in terms of projects being implemented and being constructed. And so, but we always want to take a reality check in terms of, did you approve a new development? Did you entitle new land? And so as these changes are being made, we update our model and then have a double check with the county or city staff.
A couple slides ago, you showed the projects for Monterey County, and Highway 68 between Salinas and Monterey is not even among them. It's at level F, twice a day, every day, cars sit, giving off greenhouse gases. I'm wondering who makes the decision as to what projects are on there. Do you have any influence over it, and why 68 isn't part of it?
Okay. We do have, there are some improvements to 68 included in this plan. Obviously, not the entire length is not widened included in this plan. It is a cost issue. There is just not enough funding to go around. The prioritized list of projects for Monterey County comes from TAMC, so Transportation Agency for Monterey County. They are the ones that make the funding decisions on what transportation projects move forward. And so we work with them very closely on the timing of when they expect those projects to go in. And then we studied different variations of a combination of projects for each county. And so I don't have it with me here, but on our website is a specific list of exactly what improvements to Highway 68 are included in this plan, and then what portion is only included sort of in an unfunded list.
I guess the question in my mind is, could this list change because of greenhouse gas problems? In other words, maybe you're funding something that isn't producing a lot of greenhouse gas, whereas this one is. I mean, how much does that come into it, the climate aspect?
Yes, and
TAMC takes that into account?
They do. Each agency does it differently. So most agencies rank their project on, project readiness, project need, funding availability, as well as its performance, cost benefit. Is it going to provide enough improvement in terms of travel time improvement, or if it's a rail project, options, alternative transportation options. I can't say off the top of my head exactly how they ranked them in terms of greenhouse gas reductions or climate change, but the project list has changed. And so if you look back at our last plan, it's slightly different. If you look back a couple plans, it's even more different, particularly since a lot of the funding is now being tied to climate change. And so the funding for traditional type of projects that maybe would have been available 20 years ago for building and widening new freeways, there's not as much funding for that. A lot of the funding programs at the state and federal level are really for alternative transportation modes. Are you providing greenhouse gas reductions in your projects? And so for an example is the Strategic Growth Council just released its first round of affordable housing and sustainable communities funding program, which basically is for transit, affordable housing, and active transportation programs. And one of 55% of the score to be basically prioritized and ranked for funding is related to GHG reduction. And so at the state level, they're really tying future funding programs, grant programs for transportation projects to GHG. So I expect that over the next couple cycles, there will be a change and continue to be a change in project lists. Also, some of the transportation projects on the highway side, as well as the rail, they're just really expensive. And so we've been working closely with our transportation partners on how can we build realistic phases that still make improvements that will get us to ultimately where we want to be.
And a question for Robin. You showed the results of research in various areas. To which extent is this used by the state agencies or counties or cities? You mentioned this to grow.
The research that has been, actually the science research goes into more, into documents that are like what the National Research Council did for sea level. So they use the outcome of a lot of scientific research, for example, how we determine future projections of sea level, and incorporate it into this, not necessarily a policy document, but a summary document like the IPCC report. And then various agencies will extract from those reports the information that they need. The concern that I have is that that's not always used correctly. For example, and this is a personal opinion, Pacific Grove is using this 55 inches of sea level rise at 2100, and the reason was given that they used it is because the Monterey County hazard planning department, whatever it is called, is using 55 inches. And I don't know where that number comes from, because it certainly is a lot higher than what the National Research Council. So it may be a number that came out, I don't know, 10 years ago that they're using. So the numbers get put in from the science, get put into these documents used by the governments, and they're always several, like 5 years older than what the original research, 5 or 10 years older. So.
Beverly mentioned the problem on Highway 68, and there's a similar problem trying to leave Pacific Grove to get to Monterey or Carmel late afternoon. And living in Pacific Grove, I know that not that many people can possibly live or work in Pacific Grove and be leaving town at the same time. So I suspect that maybe Pebble Beach employees and DOI people all getting done at the same time might be a big contributor. Is there any possibility or any plan for offering incentives for carpooling, for shuttles, anything like that for those groups of people?
We do. AMBAG, I mentioned, operates a van pool program. We're really targeting agricultural workers. something new, something that hasn't really been done that much in the state in the past, and so that is something that we're continuing to do. There also are van pool programs and ride-sharing programs that TAMC operates, and I was just at a meeting of Monterey Salinas Transit, board meeting I think last month, or maybe it was December, and they also want to increase the use of van pools. They see it as an option of being sort of like where maybe bus service can't be that effective in terms of limited, not, sort of one destination and one sort of a similar origin. And so that is something that we're definitely included in. Those type of programs are in the plan. Whether to say, another thing we also encourage is telecommuting or flex schedules. For those that you mentioned there, the Pebble Beach and that's not really an appropriate thing there, but it's something that we do in the rest of the region. A lot of people don't need to be in the office every single day, all day long, and so that's definitely something that we can continue to do. But I can, next time I'll see TAMC staff in a couple days and MST staff in a couple days, I'll pick their brain and see those particular area and see what they do. And I did see you guys are having TAMC at a future meeting in the next couple months or so, and so that might be something that when their staff is here too, you might want to ask, bring it up again. Frequency is always good.
Any more questions?
Thank you very much for an informative presentation on climate change issues. Just as background information, I worked for AMBAG in 1984 through 87, and the Air District after that, and so I have been following these issues for a period of time. And just one note that Heather really didn't focus in on, which is very important, is that AMBAG prepares the population forecasts for the region. And those forecasts over the years actually have shown an overall decline in terms of population growth. But those forecasts are extremely important in the regional planning process. Those forecasts are used to develop the air plans, to develop the transportation plans, to develop general plans. And so while AMBAG doesn't have, direct authority to implement or to draw up land use plans, its population forecasts become extremely important in terms of these other planning processes. And the other planning processes do have ways that assure implementation. So I just wanted to add that to Heather's presentation, and I think if you followed AMBAG programs over the years, I think that's one of the really important programs AMBAG performs. So I will be addressing some of these transportation issues. I think the toll road issue is going to be pretty interesting from a number of perspectives. And one of the perspectives that the League is concerned about is privatization of infrastructure, and so that will be something for us to keep in mind when we hear about the toll road proposal. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you again, Robin and Heather, for your presentation.